A can-do movie is a movie that just insists on being made. It doesn't care what kind of resources it lacks. It will get finished. And why do I like can-do movies? It's because I've made a couple of them myself.
So I'm back again. This is the final entry in the Stuart Gordon retrospective. And today I'm talking about Castle Freaks. So, got a nice solid four movies. We'll see how they play out. But Castle Freaks from 1995, written by Dennis Paoli and, of course, Stuart Gordon, directed by Stuart Gordon because, who else? And it's produced by Full Moon Entertainment. That is the first incarnation, I'll say, of Full Moon after Empire fell apart. It's starring Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, so it's got that nice team back together that we had in Reanimator. We've got Stuart Gordon, Barbara Crampton, Jeffrey Combs, all in major roles too. It's not like the way Jeffrey Combs has been thrown away in a couple of roles that he's had. This is legitimately him in the lead role. The budget was only $500,000, which is a big step back from something like Robot Jocks. But Stuart Gordon had a reason for wanting to make it that inexpensively. Doing it at that price point meant it could be unrated, and he had not been able to make an unrated movie since Reanimator. And it also gave him full creative control because when there's not that much money on the line, people will have a little bit more leeway with what you're doing. It's a nice 95 minutes in length, a little bit longer than some of these tight budgeted films that Charles Band has made over the years, but 95 minutes is by no means a long movie. It's a real good length for what we got here. And it was filmed in Italy at Charles Band's personal castle. When he was with Empire and using the studio there in Rome, he saw a castle for sale, and he's the kind of guy that I guess has castle money lying around. So he bought this castle. They also used it for the Pit and the Pendulum, but it's really perfect for Castle Freak because without the castle, all you got's a freak. At this point in Full Moon, and with Empire before Full Moon, but mainly with Full Moon, Charles Band would come up with a movie poster. And he'd come up with the title before he came up with a movie, a script, or even a plot. And that's kind of important for the genesis of this movie. Stuart Gordon was in Charles's office just trying to talk about something, maybe another movie they were working on. I don't quite recall at this point. And he saw the poster and he asked Charles, Charlie, he said, what's this about? And Charlie said, well, that's a castle and there's a freak. That was it. So Stuart Gordon decided he wanted to make that movie. He wanted to do something out of it. And Charles Band said he could do it as long as he did it for $500,000. Now, when I watch this movie, I think of a couple of things. I think of it as almost a demented Hunchback of Notre Dame. Of course, Quasimodo is a lot more sympathetic than the freak is here, but the freak does deserve a little bit of sympathy, and we'll talk about that as we go through, but he's way more violent than Quasimodo was, at least from my understanding of the Hunchback. It's also got a tiny bit of Frankenstein, so I'll point that out when we get to it. It's not got a ton of Frankenstein, but I do see just a little bit here. And I don't know if anybody else has made this comparison before, but I see just a little bit of Stanley Kubrick's Shining in this. Not The Shining, The Shining. And I do want to say that this movie has some pretty visceral violence. So that's something that may turn some people off. It's even more visceral than what we saw in Reanimator, in my opinion. Now, Stuart Gordon did credit an H.P. Lovecraft story called The Outsider. It's a short story. As the genesis of this movie, The Outsider is about a guy who gets out of a dungeon after being locked up there for like 20, 30 years. And I can definitely see those parallels. I mean, that part's obvious, but some people just straight up call this an adaptation of a Lovecraft work. Some folks have said this is one of the best adaptations of Lovecraft, even though I think of it as being more inspired and less based on. It's not like Reanimator where it's right there in the title. And this movie has 67% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I gotta say is pretty impressive for a movie like this. Real low budget indie movie with, some horrific content, unrated. 67% from the critics on Rotten Tomatoes. I'll take that. And it's going to be real hard to show clips for this movie. I've done my best to get some that follow the story, but it's got a lot of stuff that YouTube is not going to let me put up there without paying a price for it. But I'm going to do the best I can. What's their problem with blood and bodies? So this movie starts out with a cold open. We got this weird, creepy old lady. She's in the castle. We see her cutting some bread up. She's eating bread for breakfast. She's feeding her cat, going about just a perfectly normal morning for a European senior citizen as far as I can think. And then she goes downstairs, gets a flail, and beats the hell out of some guy who's chained up in her basement. We don't know who this guy is. We see it mostly in silhouette from the shadow. A nice little Nosferatu touch there with the lighting. But she's just welling on this guy, and you get a little bit. I don't know if The Outsider had somebody flailing somebody, because I haven't read the story, but that's where the whole point of this movie goes. And after she's given him a good beating, she beat him so hard that her heart gives out on her. I mean, she overexerted herself beating this strange person that she has chained up in her basement, goes up to her bed, lies down, and dies. And her corpse looks like it lays there for a couple of days before anybody finds it. Now, we do find out that the reason this lady lived in a castle is that she was a duchess. Her husband went off to America. He actually ran away with her sister and went to America. And because the duchess didn't have any known heirs, it went to her sister, who was dead, and then down to her sister's son. So that's where Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, and their family come into play, because they're the Americans who inherited this castle from a duchess they've never met before, and they need to go see it. They got to liquidate it. I don't think they have any plans to live in the castle long term, but you know, you got a chance to go to Italy, stay in a castle for a month. Why not? Would you stay in a castle, Sutton? Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton, they're the Rileys. And the Rileys arrive in Italy to this castle along with their blind daughter. And the first thing I'm wondering is, why is the daughter blind? What's that bringing to the story? But then I think a little bit and it's bringing a lot. It makes her extra vulnerable. You know, it's enough to see a young girl in harm's way being threatened, but it's even more when you add that blindness to it. And then I also think how the blind girl just might parallel a little bit with the blind girl from the classic Universal Frankenstein movie, the girl that doesn't realize Frankenstein's a monster, and we've got that going on here, but I think she figures out that the freak is a freak a little bit quicker than the blind girl did. And it also kind of gives us a character who doesn't judge him based on his appearance because she doesn't know what he looks like, and yet she still knows that he's a freak, and not the good kind. And as the family's coming in, claiming the castle, making their arrangements with this really cool Italian lady, I guess you'd call her the maid, she's the one who looks after the castle. Well, you see all this tension is building up. In fact, Barbara Crampton lets the lady know that Mr. Riley, Jeffrey Combs' character, is going to be sleeping in a different bedroom. So we know something's up, but we don't know what it is, but we can definitely tell that this is not a happy family. And as the story unfolds, we see what some of the problem is. It turns out Jeffrey Combs is a really bad alcoholic. And he's coming here to this castle in part to try and dry up, you know, get away from all the old triggers that he had, be in a castle where there's not supposed to be any booze, however there is. And him in this big castle, like this huge, massive space without many other people, him, his wife, and his child, that's where I get the Shining connection. And it's pretty superficial, but I can't help but see it. You know, instead of Danny Torrance, we have a blind daughter, but it does feel a lot like the Shining connection drying out. The difference is he can just walk to town, whereas in the Shining, they were, you know, snowbound. We find out a little bit more about why things are so tense, because Jeffrey Combs has a nightmare, and that nightmare reveals a lot of things about what the family's been through. And maybe there were some context clues dropped along the way that other people would have picked up on, but I had to be hit over the head with it in this nightmare, and then it all clicked for me. But we learned from the nightmare that in addition to their daughter, they also had a son who was younger than the daughter. And Jeffrey Combs was driving drunk with his kids in the car, gets in this terrible accident. It's the car crash that causes his daughter to be blind, and unfortunately his son doesn't even survive the crash. So yeah, I can see why there's a little tension. Now, while they're in this big creepy castle, all by themselves, doing their own thing, sleeping in 3 separate bedrooms, well, during the night, the blind daughter finds a cat. And you know, everybody likes cats. So she does what anybody would do. She wants to pet the cat. She wants to feed the cat. She wants to say, "Good kitty." So she follows the cat all the way down into the basement, which for all practical purposes, we need to call this a dungeon. And when she's down there, she discovers the freak. Obviously, she doesn't know what he looks like, so to her, there's just someone in the basement. That's it. She doesn't know that it's a freak. She doesn't know if it's a squatter. She has no idea. But there's someone in the basement, and she goes and tries to tell everybody. But they don't believe her because maybe all blind people are liars? Really? Why don't you believe her? And I just want to say, I work with blind people, and I actually care a lot about their condition, do everything I can to help them, so please don't make more out of this than what it is. Now, the dad finds the flail. He's like looking around his blind daughter's bedroom, I think, goes under the bed, I'm not sure why, I guess that's perfectly normal behavior for a dad to go under his teenage daughter's bed when she doesn't know he's there. And he finds this flail, and I think it's got like barbs or razors on it because he touches it and it's like it hurts. But he just seems unconcerned. I mean, I'm walking around my house, especially if I just bought a house or just moved into a house, and I find a big creepy flail, I'm probably going to have follow-up questions. But the poor kitty cat crosses paths with the freak, and the freak eats the cat. And we also get a nice shot of the cat's corpse, which makes me think of Reanimator, where we got a shot of a cat's corpse, and it makes me decide one thing and one thing only: Stuart Gordon hates cats. Also, the castle freak, the freak's chained up to the wall with both hands, and he just can't take it anymore. So he rips his own thumb off so that his hand will fit through the manacles. And that is honestly an inspired part of the movie, if you ask me. And it's creepy, it's disgusting, it feels very Stuart Gordon. It's something I wouldn't expect or think of, but man, it works here. And then he keeps the chain linked to his other hand because he needs at least one thumb. How are you going to play Nintendo if you don't have at least one thumb? But he holds the chain over his head, and this triumphant pose has become iconic from this movie, and it becomes like this really neat accessory. He uses it like a weapon, beats people with this chain, has a little bit of a Spawn feel to it, even though this predates Spawn. And then another thing that the freak does, which just makes this feel iconic, makes it feel probably bigger than what it is, but he makes this incredible garb out of an old sheet, cuts an eye hole in it, and it really does start to feel like something from Universal. A little bit of maybe a Phantom of the Opera kind of feel to it. Even a little bit of The Invisible Man, if I say so myself. But it's in a movie that not as many people know about as those others, but I love that garb. Now, as the movie starts unfolded, I'm pretty sure the freak wants to marry the girl. Marry the girl. And I'm talking about the blind girl, of course. And you probably don't have to stretch your imagination too far to understand that she does not want to marry the freak. And, she's still a teenager, like still in high school age teenager, not like 18 or 19. So maybe not marriageable age, but she was in Italy. I don't know what they do in Italy. But this kind of takes me back to the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm kind of thinking a little bit of Esmeralda there, even though it's a lot different and it's a lot darker and not exactly the same thing. I'm seeing this blind girl almost a little bit like Esmeralda, the freak a little bit like Quasimodo, and this love that just cannot happen. Mostly because it's not love. Now, in all the mess, all the stress, all the sobriety, Dad decides there's only one thing to do. He goes out to a bar and gets hammered. Like, not just a little bit drunk. I'm talking about knocking things off the bar, breaking glasses, can't stand up, absolutely hammered. And while he's there, he meets an Italian lady of the night. And he elects to acquire the services of this lady of the night, and he takes her back to the castle and tries to go down in the dungeon area to do the dirty deed. And I just gotta tell you, this was a mistake on so many different levels. This movie is a little bit easier for Jeffrey Combs to make it through if he did not do this one thing right here. But of course, you got to do that tragic flaw to give us a good movie, right? You got to introduce some curveballs into the story. So they're down in the dungeon. Jeffrey Combs does what he came to do and he leaves. The working girl doesn't want to leave. She's still down in the dungeon. The freak finds her and the freak kills her. The assault of this woman, the death scene of this woman, the abuse she takes from the freak is very graphic. It definitely sticks out compared to the rest of the movie. It is the hardest thing to sit through. I'm kind of desensitized to that sort of thing, but it does almost feel out of place in this movie that feels a little bit more literary. It feels a little bit more classic Gothic feel, but not this part. This is straight up Italian cannibal Holocaust type stuff. Now, it just so happens that this working girl was a little bit cozy with a cop. He was actually the chief of police, so he notices when she's missing. The rumors are that the chief of police is the father of this lady's son, so he takes a special interest in finding her. Which, most of the sex workers in Italy at that time, the attitude was, we're not going to waste too much energy looking for him. Very different when you're canoodling with the chief of police. So they track her down. They follow her from the bar back to Combs's castle, back to the castle, and they go, and the police become very interested in Jeffrey Combs, very interested in the whereabouts of this lady of the night. Eventually, they find her corpse, and it does not look good for Jeffrey Combs at that point. So he's getting hauled off. He's getting investigated for murder in a foreign country. He calls his lawyer, talks about the case with his lawyer, and even his own lawyer tries to extort him. That's just how rough a situation Jeffrey Combs is in. It's not bad enough that he's an alcoholic who caused damage to his family. He's also being extorted by his defense attorney. And around this time with the defense attorney, we get a really big reveal. And that's what I think makes the story magical in this movie. It's not just the visuals, which Stuart Gordon's always good at, but I think this might be my favorite story element because we find out that Jeffrey Combs' father went to America with the sister. They never actually got married, so Jeffrey Combs isn't technically an honest man. He's a bastard. And the Duchess was not very happy about this. I mean, you can understand, right? Not happy that your sister runs off with your husband. But here's the creepy part. She decides that the way to punish the husband is to just totally abuse the son that they had together. She tells everybody the son died, locks him up in the basement, and she tortures him nonstop for years. She even, emasculates him. She cuts off both the twig and the berries, and we get a good Ken doll look at that too. But he finds out, the castle freak's his brother. He kind of figures it out when all the dots get connected, and that gives us this nice extra twist to the hero versus the villain, or the lesser villain against the greater villain, or who really is the villain. You start to ask all kinds of questions, and this is the element that makes it a little bit sympathetic towards the freak. Now, the way he's behaving, there's no excuse for that, but you kind of feel sorry for the guy that he was punished for something he didn't do. Punished for the sins of the father. So the cops are in the castle, a policeman dies, maybe another policeman dies, bodies start piling up a little bit, all kinds of chaos breaks loose as the monster in the monster movie does his monstrous things. Then we have this big finale on the rooftop, and this is great. It's beautiful. It looks like something straight out of an old Gothic tale. It has like the thunder and the lightning flashes, and you get silhouettes of people, and the rain is just pouring down, and they're battling for tooth and nail, battling for their very survival on this rooftop. And I love all the visuals of this. This was made with a little bit of extra TLC, particularly since there wasn't a lot of money behind it. Stuart Gordon had to roll up his sleeves and really get in there to get this done. And I think it's the best part of the movie. It works so well for me. It's the kind of thing I could sit and just watch that finale time and time again without watching the whole movie. But we get a noble sacrifice here. Jeffrey Combs, despite having such a terrible relationship with his family, well, he's, in an indirect way, in the story way, though I don't think it's going through his head at the moment, he's going to redeem himself for the crimes he's committed, for the sins he's committed. He's going to take being a terrible father and try to find some way to have a noble sacrifice, you could say, because he's fighting and he's protecting the family, but he just can't fully defeat this castle freak because he's a freak. It's hard to defeat a freak. They don't call him a freak because they're normal. But he comes up with an idea. That loose manacle that I talked about that's still attached to one hand of the castle freak. Well, Jeffrey Combs puts it onto his own hand, and he just jumps off the rooftop, dragging the freak with him. They both hit the ground really hard. They both die. And we get this classic story part where your final act redeems you for all the bad things you've done, but you still have to be punished for it, so you end up dead. Redeemed, but dead. Classic storytelling. Think of A Tale of Two Cities, It's a far, far better thing I do today, that whole thing. So the high points on this movie, because you can probably tell I'm gushing over it a little bit. I really enjoy this movie, but the high points, I love the location. Shooting it there in Charles Band's castle. It's a beautiful location that they got for $0. That's also nice, but you can't get more authentic when you're trying to shoot something in an Italian castle than actually shooting it in an Italian castle. And because of all the years working in Rome, I'm sure that Charlie had some connections there locally that helped save on the budget too. The makeup for the freak is great. It's just amazing. It does not feel like low budget makeup in any way. That face is all distorted. The bodysuit that he wears looks great. I think a lot of the money they had was spent on making the freak look freakishly freak-like. And then Jeffrey Combs is in full effect. I saw him just busting through the screen in Reanimator, and then he just kind of had a lot of bit parts for a while. But here, he's bursting back through that screen again. Totally different character than Herbert West. Playing it as a troubled person, not as a uber-confident person. But he does great. Carries the movie on his back. This is the Jeffrey Combs that does not disappoint. And then all movies have warts. I say that every week, and this movie's no exception. But as far as warts go, I think it's humorless. One thing that I like about Stuart Gordon, what he had in Robot Jocks, what he had in Reanimator. Good dark humor. It was absent in Dolls, and I didn't like that very much. but there's no humor at all that I identify here in Castle Freak. However, your mileage may vary. Maybe you don't like humor in your horror movies. And the mutilation of the prostitute, like I said before, it's really out of place here. It really feels like something in Cannibal Holocaust or one of those really gruesome, gory Italian movies from the 70s, compared to the rest of it that plays more like horror and less like gore. That might be a bit much for some people. Now me, I watch Last House on the Left every Christmas morning, so I'm kind of not a big deal to me, but I'm thinking of others here. And then, this girl that played the blind daughter, she had some scenes that were a little suggestive. And she looked awfully young. So I looked up how old was she. She was like either 16 or 17 when she made this movie. And I know back then and back in Europe, it was not such a big deal 30 years ago. But I'm not living 30 years ago. I'm living today. And I just wondered, there had to be somebody 18 who could have played that role. So I don't like that part. But the final word. This is a gothic classic that was made on a low budget. Stuart Gordon had full control, which is great, and I consider this a horror classic. I'll be back next week. In the meantime, you can like and subscribe, and that way you get what's coming to you. But I give the movie 4 out of 5 Ed Woods.